85.
85.
It's a lot.
Do you think it's a lot? So much time.
So much
time and space.
And space is involved in this. Which segues into the topic.
Of time and space.
How smooth we did that. I don't think we've ever introduced a topic within the first 30 seconds that well before.
Wow.
Now the trick is, can we stay on it?
I know, right? We should get some sort of word for this. Yeah, so time and space. But the reason why I think, okay, and we were already talking about it off screen, but or off microphone. Oh, both. Time and space of screen and microphone. So what I seem to be struggling with right now, and right now is like late April.
2025.
2025, yeah.
Got to get the time right.
I got to get the time right. Is how quickly my thoughts, right? Probably maybe maybe that's what it is. How quickly my thoughts of everything mattering a lot, like monkey mind, almost like that, like I don't know why this comes in, buckshot approach to everything mattering. You know, like when you shoot a gun and it's buckshot, it like splatters the pellets, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it splatters them wide. And like I am bouncing between everything matters so much all the time, like period, to nothing matters, like higher consciousness standpoint. And it's just like a super weird place to be for me. And I'm having a really hard time dealing with it. Like it's uncomfortable to go between like things matter to things completely do not matter. And so like behaving, you know, like if it's really, really quick, what I'm recognizing, I don't even have a space out of which to behave. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
So because to some extent, think about this, when things matter a lot, because it's a pain body being triggered, right? Or you know, or some sort of generalized approach to scarcity or unsafety or being unloved, whatever it is that is being triggered, then the action stems out of that space, right? So as shitty as it is something I'm well familiar with, you know, having been on earth for 40 years in this lifetime, right? And so like, yeah, I don't want to have to do that, but I'm very well familiar of how it feels. I'm familiar that like, oh, look, everything matters and I have to do this in order to mitigate X.
Mm-hmm.
But then at the same time, if this flip is so quick and then on the other side, nothing matters, the non-behavior towards the nothing and everything is the most right thing to do. Do you know what I mean? Like
I do.
When nothing matters and you're in that awe state of euphoria, like just connection to oneness and consciousness, there's no behavior. Like I write like that contrast of like, yeah, there's nothing to do. Everything is beautiful and perfect. And if you bounce between those two states so much, it gets really confusing. Like one, like it's a choice, it's an active choice into what is it that you're experiencing, where you're vibrating out of. But two, I think it's very confusing to me because like it points out where action is coming from and what it would be like to have no action. Am I that boring? Oh my gosh. That's it. 23 years I've expired my interest.
No, I can totally relate to that. I do the same thing. I've done the same thing for a good while now. I bounce back and forth on a lot of things like that.
No, but it used to be to where there was time in this and time in that, right? Space and time.
Well, okay.
Do you know what I mean? The length between like, oh, look, I feel triggered or I feel like I am judging or I'm behaving out of unsafety and I can see it. And I could see how this action would come from it, either, you know, years in the past blindly, but now so with awareness and you can kind of get to judge it. The time and space being perceived, how we used to perceive it or how I used to perceive it, had a lot of grace. And the slow transition period I bounced between this state where things matter and this state where things don't matter. At the worst case scenario, that bounce time would have been, but I mean, back in the days, it could have been weeks for me, right? Like if I was on some sort of depressive episode where, I was unsafe and the unsafety was triggered, I could have went weeks or months not realizing that I was vibrating at a low density and I was, depressed, right? Like whenever you had your depressive episodes, it could be months, if not years, right? With me, like,
but at the same time, back then, like out of it was never where I am today either.
Out of it was still depressive. Well, I mean, because there's no awareness.
Maybe, there's no awareness. Out of it was maybe just some sort of my baseline was not great.
Yeah,
even when I was not depressed.
Yeah, well, there's like depression to where you're suicidal. And then there's like just generalized meh.
Yeah, generalized malaise about life. Yeah. That was the good days.
Yeah, the meh was the malaise.
Yeah.
It's the sound effect of the malaise. Your jaw has to drop as if you're like that.
I was trying to say malaise with that.
Yeah, right.
I have a new ringtone for you now.
Oh, no. Yeah, and so, but right, back then, prior to awareness, those swings would be very wide. If there's even a swing into awareness or that oneness or that, unified consciousness, that unified field of euphoric consciousness, even if you never went there, you at least had swings of better and worse, right? Of good and bad, let's say, or better or worse, or bad and worse.
Bad and less bad.
Yeah. Right. But now the swing is into this like euphoric, oh my gosh, everything is beautiful and perfect state to like, oh my God, and so between those two, the grace period in between is narrowing down to where like I would wager to say that within 1 second, I can probably go back and forth 3 times. Back and forth. Like, so dual splits, right? So six. What was this? 3 transitions, but it's 6 states back and forth, right? And that just, I'm having like, it's, I don't know, the I guess the message that I keep on getting as I'm struggling with this is that basically it amplifies the idea of the constant choice that you have into your experience. So when it becomes that quick, the lesson there or the very obvious thing is the choice is that. I mean, I can't even, this is probably a second snap itch. It's like more than 3 transitions a second.
Yeah, I don't know that I have it that fast. I have it, fast. It'll be 30 seconds a minute this way and then that way and then this way and then that way. I don't think I've ever had it that fast.
Oh, it's just unsettling because like
no, I mean it's unsettling at that in that it's like you feel very ungrounded and because when you're in either state you feel it very viscerally. It is the ultimate truth, and at the same time you're like, well, I know just seconds ago, just minutes ago, I had a completely different worldview. All this stuff mattered, or maybe all this stuff didn't matter, and I'm like. It's weird trying to reconcile that.
Yeah, it's really hard.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really hard. Yeah. But which, I guess maybe leads us into like the exploratory nature as I set the preface of like, here's what I'm struggling with and here's why it's difficult. And then as we proceed on this discussion, more insight will come out. But something that's coming up is I think everything since 1920, since quantum mechanics, right? Or maybe even before, you can correct me on this.
I think it was right around 1900. I think
1920 is when quantum idea of quantum.
I think it was 1900 even.
Oh, really?
I think the guy was wrong yesterday.
Oh, okay. So anyway, correct me if I'm wrong on this.
It's in the show notes, whichever.
The idea that the time is expanding, right? Right. Is that the time is expanding or contracting? What have the scientists been saying for the longest time?
Space is expanding.
But what have the scientists been saying about time?
I mean,
From the quantum mechanics.
Well, I think relativity talks more about time than quantum mechanics does.
Oh, okay.
Oh, and they both have something to say, but it used to be that, a second is a second, whether you're here or you're on Mars or you're in a spaceship, which didn't exist back then, or you're flying around a black hole, which was unconceived of back then. A second is a second, universally. And then relativity is like, well, not exactly. There's seconds are experienced, time is experienced differently based on things like acceleration and gravitational warping of space and time. And so, the two things. Famously, the orbit of Mercury was the orbit of all the planets was very well understood. Before the 20th century, right? And but Mercury was off by just a little bit. Like it didn't follow the Newtonian model in the same way that Venus, Earth, and so on did. It was only after relativity did the scientists go, wait a minute, Mercury is close enough to the massive gravitational well of the sun that is warping it. And I think it's literally called frame dragging, where like you're orbiting around this, I think the fact that the sun is spinning also changes it too. And it messes with the way that time is perceived locally on Mercury, and then how we perceive Mercury's time, they diverge. And then once we put relativity in the mix, now we can very accurately track Mercury's orbit. And two, GPS satellites, they have to account for relativity because they're moving quickly relative to us in a gravitational field of Earth. If you didn't have the relativity formulas in there, it doesn't work. And that was
they wouldn't be in the orbital.
They wouldn't be accurate.
Lock.
The GPS wouldn't be accurate. It wouldn't be able to tell you where you are because basically, they don't know where you are. All they're doing is going, I'm GPS satellite number 3, going bloop. Here's the time. The current time is X. But in order to calculate that time, the time that the satellites experience is different from the time that we experience on Earth. And they need to transmit the time we experience on Earth, not the time that they experience on the satellite. So they have to slow it down or speed it up a little bit.
By how much?
It's a fraction of a percent, but it's enough that over time it would be horribly inaccurate.
Okay.
And that was one of the things is they're like, we think relativity says we're going to need to do this, but we don't know. And when one of the first GPS satellites, they launched up and they had a switch to turn that on and off. And that was one of the first proofs that relativity is, this is how it seems to be. They had to leave it on.
Yeah, right. So you said it's called frame time?
Frame dragging. When you get close to a very gravitationally dense body, like a star or a black hole or something. And I think the fact that it's rotating might matter, but the fact that you're orbiting around it also matters. And you just experience time. Remember in Interstellar how they were down on that crazy planet with waves, and they were down there for like 6 hours, but it was actually 6 years? That.
Yeah, that was an exaggerated version of that.
Maybe not.
Oh, maybe not.
I don't know that humans would be able to survive this type of stuff. Might be the exaggerated part, but no, that is kind of how it works. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and so I'll bring this in. I already brought it up to you, but maybe this is where it comes in since you said frame dragging. One of the messages that I had after my dream is that what we are experiencing, which I guess I kind of knew this, but when they shove it into my head, somehow it becomes so. There's this knowing about it more so than oh yeah, I heard some scientists say that. It changes the perception of how committed I am to that particular knowledge, maybe. And they said that what we're experiencing is we're experiencing frames, and so our perception, or my perception of this very quick.
When you say frames, you mean more like frames in a video, like yeah.
No, so
I think frame dragging is more like frame of reference dragging.
yeah, this is frames like I do so yeah, you see you brought up the video, and so that this is what it comes down to. Okay, I'm going to kind of like loop out and loop back in. Okay, I think this is where it came in. So, we, Annabelle and I were watching Teddy Swims perform on some stage, right? And on that stage, he whatever how stage effects has like some sort of whatever these days, usually some sort of lighting, right? Some sort of screens or lighting, depending on how big of a budget they had. And so he had, from a zoomed out version, what looked like a sun, like an orange sun, yellow sun, and then an orange background behind the sun. So almost like this Lion King sunset type of a scene. Do you know what I mean? Without the savannah. Why is that funny?
I was going to say Savannah.
Yeah.
I just don't know what the words are.
Yeah, I don't know. And so then this is live performance, and he's just standing at this basically big LED screen, let's say, of the sun. Maybe not even LED, because I don't know. And then like they zoom in on him, right? And then basically on the zoom of the camera, you can see individualized lights, just like you do on the sphere, right? Whenever you
Las Vegas sphere.
Yeah, the Las Vegas
close
sphere.
enough you can see those little hockey puck sized.
Yes.
Yeah.
So this had the same effect, right? It has the same effect of like when you zoom in, all of a sudden you see the individualized light, but when you zoom out, you don't see the spaces in between. And the spaces actually, like on the sphere, I was like, wow, those are really big spaces in between. But the glow of that light and the perception of how we perceive things with our eyes, right? Like we talked about eyes today, just completely fill in the gaps.
Same thing with like halftone printing, like when you like how they, I probably still do, make pictures in a newspaper, like the black and white picture in a newspaper. It's just a whole bunch of dots.
Yeah,
and the dots are more or less spaced out, and they're bigger or smaller dots depending on if you want a darker blob or lighter blob, and that is very convincing. That that looks like the suspect or whatever the photo is.
Yeah.
But if you look at it closely with a magnifying glass, it's just a bunch of dots.
Yeah.
Sorry. Duotone. Anyway, when you use more than one color to do it, and you can blend those colors, it's still different dot. It's exactly the same thing.
Yeah,
it's just different color dots. There's cyan, yellow, and magenta dots that are printed, but they have very specific angles that these dots are laid at for the different colors, so that they interact in the best way.
Or interact with our eyes.
With our eyes. It's
right?
all
it's all reverse engineered through our eyes.
The whole thing's an illusion.
Yes.
Here's a bunch of dots.
Yes.
Who's the is it the Impressionist painter who painted the thing? And it's all just dots.
Yeah.
And if you get up close to it, it's a bunch of dots. But if you get 2 or 3, 4 feet away from it, it's a picnic in a field or whatever it was.
Yeah. Which is super impressive.
Well, it's impressive, but it's all just an illusion to make the mind see what the artist wanted to see. Yeah,
but it's an illusion in a sense that we reverse engineered things to fit the limited parameters under which we perceive vision.
Yeah.
Like we
/ limited technology to print photos. Well, this seems convincing, so we'll run with this. They still use it.
The technology is limited at all times, right? We always have some sort of limited technology. And so the only thing that we're doing is kind of the arrival style. We reverse engineer of how we will perceive this based on the limited parameters that we have to work with. And in this case, the limited parameter, right, is how our eyes perceive ultraviolet light. Right? Ultraviolet or just regular light? What is it? Ultraviolet light.
We don't perceive ultraviolet light.
Oh, what light do we perceive? Regular light?
Visible light.
Visible light, sure. Right. But it's just that, right? Just this little narrow parameter. Mm-hmm. Anyway, and so looping back. she sees Teddy Swim sing, and then I'm like, oh my gosh, look how separate those dots look when the camera zooms in, and then the camera zooms out, and then you back at seeing this Lion King sunset, and she's like, wait, is our TV a whole bunch of these little dots as well? Like, immediate thought.
That's smart,
right? I was flabbergasted. There was like zero time.
She connected that.
She connected it right away.
Great.
Just right away, right? And so she jumps onto the hearthroom
table,
coffee table, and from just for the audience, for the hearthroom coffee table basically is right next to the TV, so you can just kind of like lean into the TV and see it. And so she like stares into the dots, and she's like, "Oh yeah, I can see the dots. I can see the individualized colors, right?"
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so, which, kind of interestingly, we are seeing his dots in our dots, and we're interpreting all of those dots together as one image.
Right.
Do you see what I mean?
A moving image at that.
Right. Well, but she's moving, and then Teddy Swims is moving, right? And then the camera is moving. Do you see what I mean? Like, so... But it's all dots. It's just all variances of dots.
Just to make it even more amazing, each pixel is actually 3 subpixels, a red, green, and a blue subpixel that blend together to, okay, that looks like white light to me. Crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, because the white light is
right, but
it encompasses
red, green,
wholeness.
Yeah.
Well, no, the white light. And at the etheric level of interpretation is wholeness, right? The what is it? The prism breakdown, right?
Yeah, but like
so we reverse
the
engineer
pixel isn't the smallest unit on the TV screen. There's the subpixel that red, green, and blue subpixel that you know what I'm trying to say.
To balance it out.
Well, no,
shade it out.
Like. People think, oh, the smallest unit on a screen is a pixel. 1 dot is a pixel. 1 white dot is a pixel, right? But that 1 white dot is made up of 3 constituent subpixels, a red, green, and blue. And if that was a red dot, it would only have the red lit and the green and the blue would be off.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. So when you look closely, you can actually see, it looks like white. If you have just a white TV screen and you look, it looks white until you get close enough. And then it's like red, green, blue, red, green, blue, red, green, blue, red, green, blue. All the way across.
Yeah, but think about that. We're reverse engineering the natural interpretation of a prism.
Yeah, yeah.
That's the only thing we're doing.
Yeah, and just because they're close enough, the dots are close enough, / we're sitting far enough away that it's white light.
Yeah.
And it's like, you can't tell me it's not white light, because it is.
Well, this is why people say, a lot of people who believe that science is God, right? From that standpoint, this is what they're basically describing. Is they're describing this idea that in actuality, everything that flows out of the innate oneness, right, is divine. Our divine interpretation of life, divine interpretation of experience, or divine wholeness interpreted at a micro scale or in perceived lesser than state, right? And so when we try to study things or discover things or learn things or invent things, the only thing we're doing is we're reverse engineering ourselves back to the wholeness that is actually at the core of our existence. Do you see what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah.
So yes, through quite literal interpretation of the only thing that we are able to discover and perceive is the only thing that is part of this one ray of light. And then thus any discovery or any invention is just basically an interpretation of that truth from a scientific point of view.
Mm-hmm.
Does it make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's interesting. Anyway, okay. So back to my loop. So she says this and I'm like, oh, okay. So look at this. There's the frame of reference in this case is scaled at light. It's scaled at color, right? And in our interpretation of color, right? And so going back to the frames, our frame of reference is scaled to where we believe in that same way that our life, our experience, like, so when I move this arm, right? I'm moving through space and time, right? And then what you were saying that, there's no interrupt versions of this perception.
Yeah.
Right. We think that our nature of existence is very fluid, and then thus this is a fluid thing, which does not present to be a problem at all in the case that, for the most part, unless I have a super injured shoulder as opposed to semi-injured shoulder, this doesn't damage anything in any way. But to that same scale, right, which we apply to, if this is my experience and just movement of this arm, if I go back to some traumatic injury that I had, or pain body that set in, or an injury, like quite literally not a mental injury, but a physical injury that set in eons and eons ago, right? Or, however many things ago, we believe that this is a fluid movement without interruption, right?
Okay.
And so no harm here, right? But if I believe that, let's say my spine is injured, and then that is my truth. Remember on one of the Gaia shows that we just watched, like William Henry was talking about how, like, years and years ago, he injured himself or fell somewhere on the trip, and then had to have a knee brace, or like whatever I see a lot of people wear those black things that like have Velcro, and they kind of like strap your knee to where you feel like it doesn't fall apart. I don't know what they're called, but whatever it is. I was always curious. I'm like, what the heck is it doing? Now I realize, like, I'm like, oh, okay, so you have the perception that is keeping things together.
Well, I used to have one, and I ran with it for a while because my left knee felt weird. And I'm like, well, this kind of like stops it from jiggling in a way that's uncomfortable.
It doesn't jiggle.
And then I didn't need it. So I don't even know where it is.
Yeah, no, but so the idea, he said that I thought I would have this for the rest of my life. And he wore it for 6 years nonstop, right? He basically perceived his injury through this flow of time to be permanent, right? So think about that, right? Because the accident, the time of the accident, and whatever diagnosis he either received from the doctor probably, or perceived himself, had him frame by frame pass on that injury millisecond to millisecond into the future. He carries the frame rate of this particular experience from 6 years back, millisecond per millisecond. Like, remember Annabelle asked you how many milliseconds there is in the day yesterday? It's like that, right? So you're just constantly choosing experience to experience, frame by frame, to carry something from the past into the forward. And then thus you build your reality forward through this frame rate. Versus what they're trying to at least get me to understand right now is that there are so many frames, and what you were saying is they are separate instances. Each frame is a separate instance. So within 1 second, we have countless of opportunities to completely reset the frame.
Right. I mean, that there's two things. One, there's this statistical trope where, okay, I flip a coin 5 times. Heads, 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 heads. Now I'm going to flip this coin again. What do you think it's going to land on?
Around 50-50.
That is the correct answer. The correct answer is 50-50. But there are some people who go, oh, it'll probably be heads because you're on a roll. Or there's some people who will be, oh, it's going to be tails because tails is due.
Yeah.
And so they want to assign some sort of causality, some sort of continuity to these independent events. Every coin toss is, assuming a quote fair coin, is completely independent of, it is 50-50. It might be heads is just as likely as heads, tails. But that second one sounds more random to us.
Unless the coin is weighted.
That's what I mean by a fair coin.
Okay.
But that sounds more random, so that sounds more likely. And heads, that's a pattern. Everybody can see that that's a pattern. And so that sounds unlikely.
Yeah, but
in that case, they're all completely, there's what, 2, 4, 8, 16, 30. There's 32 different possibilities of flipping a coin 5 times. And each one of them is as likely as any of the others, whether that's all heads, all tails, or some sort of mixture of the both. But there's this weird human nature to push that forward, which I think is like very close to what you're trying to say. Like, oh, I've got my knee hurts now, therefore it's going to keep hurting, and I keep pushing that belief forward.
Belief or message or whatever you're holding on to, this is the important part. You're just carrying it into the frame. You're quite literally carrying your baggage from frame to frame to frame.
The other thing that relates to that is I just had a friend make some comments about how horrible it is to be old. And I'm like, let me tell you this story. I don't remember who it was, but someone did this study where they took a whole bunch of old dudes and they put them in, and these are old people with, arthritis and with walkers and with, knobby joint fingers and stuff who can't do much. And they put them in this house, like fraternity house or something, with all the memorabilia from like 40 years in the past or 20 years in the past or whatever it was. And so it was all the movie posters from that era and all the music from that era, and the TV was playing whatever, the shows from that era, the news from that, whatever it was. And they were like, hey, you old fogies, you're not 80 anymore. Now you're 60 or now you're 40, whatever the age difference was. Believe that for the next week. Live that in this house. Just believe that you are now 40 years old. And, look, all the stuff is back from when you were 40 years old, back from whatever year it was. And they did this. And at the end of that week, these men, their arthritis had subsided. They weren't using the walkers. Their mental capacity had gone up, I don't know, some ridiculous percent that is just incredible. And some of them were actually playing like touch football. And these were people who could barely move a week ago just by believing that they were young. And so now they're pushing this positive message into the future about their health and their physical state.
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah.
But, that example is basically changing the frame. In this case, the scientists who designed the house and brought the memorabilia in and then basically said, hey, you're getting paid for this experiment and here's what your belief structure is, right? So they were being, in this case, paid, to be experimental bunnies, to where the experiment is setting in a different frame.
Yeah.
Right. Now, question is, later, after they leave this experiment and go back to reality, will they reset their frame back? But I think there's a lot of benefits to recognizing, right? Just to recognizing this is how it works.
Right. I mean,
when you recognize that it is your choice which frame you push forward.
Yeah.
Gives you a lot of sovereign power.
Yeah. When in the physical health realm, we call it the placebo effect. That, if I believe this is going to work, then it does work. If I believe that my bones are healthy and I can, play touch football and I don't need the walker, then that ends up manifesting itself. Or on the flip side, the nocebo effect. If I believe that I'm going to get cancer and I'm going to be able to walk, that's going to happen too.
Yeah. Well, like the fear of something has you
right. That's right. It isn't even necessarily the belief that I'm going to get it or the belief that I have it. The fear that I might get it is often enough just to get you to get it. Yeah,
but the fear is actually inserting a frame of here's my reality. Here's my reality. The mind, right, does not understand that my reality that I don't want. It's at the top of your mind awareness. So that therefore that's the frame.
Right. You're living this fear, which is basically you're projecting, I've got it in the future and it sucks because, whatever.
Yes.
So while you may not literally believe that you have it, you are mentally living a life where you do have it at some point in the future. That's what the fear is.
Yeah. So you're designing the frame, you're designing this reach, right? Like if this was, 20,000 frames, then you're designing 20,000 frames forward.
Right. And there's this.
But we always design our frames forward. That's what I wanted to say.
Yeah.
We get subconsciously our vibratory frequency, right, of what is that we are constantly thinking about, right, or find important, or how much we're triggered, is going to design the next frame, right? So me flipping back and forth like that is basically kind of like this visceral slap in the face of like, look how quickly these frames change.
Right. I mean, in a sense, it's like, look how much influence you can have over it.
Yeah, it's extremely empowering.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Right. But at the same time, it paints a very, very interesting picture of responsibility when you're vibrating at, oh my gosh, things really, really matter right now. Right. And if I'm triggered and I'm trying to compensate for unsafety and compensate for this, it's really obvious. Because if you're flipping back and forth, one, it's obvious I would be acting out of this trigger. The next frame would be me acting out of that trigger. Do you see what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And that trigger, right? And this is interesting. It's impossible to uncover that trigger if you're just surface dwelling, right? If you're surface dwelling going, oh shit, I really do feel like shit. And then it looks like I need to do this in order to resolve this feeling, right? Or to give myself a dopamine hit, right? But if you don't go back into what you're carrying as your weight, but by basically kind of this long tail history of why that frame continues to go into the future, you will just blindly propagate that into every frame forward. Meaning to reward that. When you go into your childhood trauma to uncover of why you behave a certain way, or why you need this, or why you feel this way, why you feel that way, that is when you can go, oh, I understand now. And I understand how this is kind of like this thing that I propagate forward from point A to point B, going back to my highway reference, right? And then that's when you can choose a frame C, which is somewhere on the side.
Yeah. When this happened to me, and again, it's not as rapid back and forth as yours, but you kind of get to go, well, which one of these do I like better? Do I like this, the dense version where, everything really matters and there's all these problems that need solving and whatever? Or do I like kind of being above it where nothing really needs to be done? You can still do stuff, but nothing. It's hard to, how do I even word it? Like the seriousness, the charge behind everything has just dissipated.
Yeah, but in my case, if I'm flipping back and forth, I go to like, oh, this is complete nonsense. And this is just complete story of bullshit, right? To like, oh my God, this is the most important thing for my survival. So yeah, I'm at the same time looking at it and at the same time imploding with it. But it does still feel separate. Like it is not oneness. And this is interesting. I will say this, but you can go back to your thought. I feel like this has something to do, and this is me not knowing anything about like astrophysics or creation, like biblical creation, let's say, or things like that. But it has something to do with quantum collapse. And I think the speeding up ratio, right, that I'm experiencing right now, and then you having your own speed up at your own rate, is somehow slowly wedging itself forward towards an imminent collapse of all probability. And I don't know what that means. I'm not a quantum physicist or, astrophysicist, but something when a quantum collapse happens, then instead of perceiving the separation between the choices, you perceive all choices at once, which is, I know what that means.
It's like the opposite of a collapse.
No, so the collapse turns itself inside out. When a collapse happens, so like when the black hole, I don't know if there's such thing as black hole, but let's say there's black holes, right? And when something explodes, it implodes.
Yeah, like in quantum physics, like where the position of an electron around an atom is defined as this like probability field. It's kind of everywhere all at once, but it's more over here and it's less over here, but it's everywhere all at once until you try to actually measure it, and then it's exactly right here, period.
Yeah.
And when you measure that over time, it turns into that field. It's like, well, 30% of the time it's here, and 10% of the time it's here, and that matches the probability of where it would be. So the collapse goes from all possibilities to here's the one with 100% and everything else is 0%. And what you're describing is almost the opposite. It's like all possibilities now become open.
Yeah. Well, I'm trying. So right, like I'm just. It's like, do you remember when I told you that I got whatever the download that I got, and they'll come in chunks, and it was just like so big that I couldn't even access it, and they're just like coming in tiny little chunks. I think that's as part of that, because what we're talking about is structure, established structure, right? And then I was told that the beings that establish structure, I think this is what they're talking about, the structure of space and time and our interpretation of that structure, right? Yeah. So what I'm talking about in this case is at some point when something starts flipping between option A and B, or 1 and 2, right? And it's flipping. In this case, I'm only using 2 scenarios, right? But imagine it is unquantifiable number of scenarios. Whenever you start basically torquing yourself between those, very 2 options, the speed up of that process basically sooner or later enters into some sort of form of explosion. Okay. Like explosive nature of its interpretation, because the net energy that you had behind it now reaches a point of oneness.
Let me ask this. So, you know how if there's like a one of those flashing yellow stoplights at in front of like a fire station or something, and it's like on for 2 seconds and then off for 2 seconds, and it's definitely on and it's definitely off, and there's no real blending of those.
Mm-hmm.
But then if you think about something like a lot of car taillights have they have LEDs, and instead of dimming the LED by reducing the voltage or the current, they reduce the duty cycle. So it's on 50% of the time and off 50% of the time, but it's on and off, 120 times a second. So most people don't see it flicker, but it just looks dimmer.
Mm-hmm.
So it's on and off, right? In reality, it's on and it's off. If you had a high-speed camera, you could clearly see it's on and then it's off, just like the stoplight. But it's doing it so fast that we perceive it as in the middle. It's neither on nor off. It's kind of half brightness.
Yeah.
When I have this happen, it's definitely on and definitely off. And that's not blending to some sort of third intermediate state. When it's happening really fast to you, is there some sort of third state kind of in between that is an option?
Are you talking about the lights, or are you talking about this?
I'm talking about this. Is it still on and off just really fast, or are they collapsing or merging into some sort of middle state where it's like a little bit of this, but a little bit of it? It's not nothing matters and everything matters. It's, well, some things matter. Something like that. I don't know.
I think this is what's happening. Because we live in state of duality, right? The reason why we experience cold is because we experience hot, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why we're experiencing, pain is so we can experience ecstasy, right? Or whatever. I don't know what it is, right? But the physical senses are very driven by, when we smell the flower, it is in contrast to not smelling a flower. Or when we smell a flower, it's in contrast to not smelling poop. Do you know what I mean?
I knew I was waiting for you to go to poop.
But do you know what I mean? Like everything is contrasted within itself. So to that same standard, even though that this is a spiritual concept of oneness, me experiencing oneness and me experiencing complete clusterfuck of shit is a state of duality, right?
Gotcha.
But still a split. Do you see what I mean?
Well, I mean, is it a split or is it a spectrum? it's like, oh yeah, there's light and there's dark, but then there's also, I guess, literally shades of gray in between.
Yeah, but the reason why I'm feeling this speed up, this immense speed up, I think what's going to happen is they are going to merge in, implode or explode in order to implode and then produce a state of matter that is different than three-dimensional interpretation of those states. And I think multidimensional reality will be generated from that. This is like, I know this is far reaching, and I know I have no clue what I'm talking about because I'm not a theoretical physicist. I was praying to God for a theoretical physicist 5 years ago when this shit started happening to me, but no one came. So I'm still there. I'm still praying for one. But honestly, I don't even know if I will ever be able to find someone who's so open-minded who would be like, yeah, Tanya, tell me what you think about it. But I think what I'm describing, and I don't know if this is theoretical physicist or if this is like quantum or if this is relativity or if this is just like time and space dissecting. Because do
you need a physicist or do you need a shaman?
Shut up. No, right. But the shaman, this is the difference. A shaman would go into a multidimensional space, right? So when I go into my shamanic cyclical nature of existence, I go into that space. Now, and this is maybe just my limited nature of shamanistic skill, right? Excuse me, but I interpret multidimensional reality by touching various aspects of its being, but I cannot perceive the wholeness. Do you remember I was talking to you about it, like as far as structure, right? When I go into etheric plane, I'm realizing that I'm touching structure, but it's almost like I'm touching structure at the cross sections, but I cannot perceive the structure, right?
Okay.
And so from that point, the three-dimensional space or three-dimensionality would have to completely collapse in order to be able to perceive and then thus behave or thus be in the frame of something outside of duality. And maybe the duality here is that perception and its linear, smooth transition, or perception of it as a frame at all.
What does that collapsed three-dimensional reality look like?
I don't know. I haven't downloaded. I mean, that's downloaded, but it hasn't been activated yet. So yeah. So right, like it's. I told you whenever the download came, I was so, because I'm so impatient. I was so eager to know what was there that I kept on asking. I'm like, can you at least tell me what it is, right? And then of course I know that they told me they created structure, right? And so they're like, well, it's that. And I'm like, can you at least just give me the brushstroke? And basically the message that I got is you do not have enough bandwidth to download or open the file. Like the interpretation that I got is like if it's a huge zip file, but you're opening it on like 1995 Dell, I don't know. Whatever. And then like the bandwidth or the bandwidth of the download, or maybe the chunk, the megabytes of space that you have available to open the zip file does not exist yet. Right. So you have to be upgrading your RAM. I don't know. Is this the right term?
Sure.
Whatever. You can correct my.
There's a concept called a zip bomb, where you can take. It's a very carefully crafted zip file that, it's like, here's this, 10K zip file, which turns into like 1,000 gigabytes, because it's like, the way the compression works is like, the number 0 repeats 100 times. And then you can express that really small, right? You don't have to say 0, 0, 0, 100 times. You can say, the number 0 repeats 100 times, something like that. But it's like, the number 0 repeats 100 billion times, or something like that.
Yeah.
So
yeah. But
then you open it and it's just, you can't possibly.
But in that same way, again, that is reverse engineering of data, right? Data perception, right? So when you get a download, it's a huge amount of data, one that my three-dimensional space cannot possibly perceive, right? Or I don't have the bandwidth to basically open the entire file, right? So most of the time when people get downloads, what does it do? It just like comes to you in like tiny little chunks. And then you'll hear this and you'll hear that. And you're like, oh, wait, this relates to this and this relates to that, right? And like, some people say that like, oh yeah, 50 years later, I finally got an answer to that. Do you know what I mean? I would kill myself if it took me 50 years to figure some shit out. Impatience. I think it comes down to impatience. But again, 50 years is a perception of time, right?
We're getting up there to 50, so.
No, from the time I started the attempt of figuring something out, right? Because I would say that, from, 7 or 8 until on is basically, swim out into the deep waters in order to, not know anything in the dark, right? And then sooner or later, you're like, wait, maybe I should start swimming back. But, that the sooner or later was really a long time for me.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they say 40 years, like around 40 is normal. With me, it was like, 35?
Well, that's the time when Saturn is in opposition from when you, where it was when you were born.
Is that what it is, Saturn?
Yeah, it's. It depends on when you were born, but it's somewhere from like 38 to 42, 43 years is the typical Saturn to opposition. Not like a solar opposition, but it's opposition to where it was in the sky from where you were born.
Yeah, I wonder what that has to do.
Astrological opposition.
Yeah, I don't know what that has to do with as far as.
I think that's
interpretation of structure.
That's I've heard that described as one of the contributing factors to most people's midlife crisis.
Yeah, no, I know, but what we have done is we have taken something, and this knowledge has probably been downloaded, right? So it came downloaded, but it is still something that we perceive a structure, right? We perceive Saturn as a structural planet out there, right? With, its huge gravitational pull. And then we perceive a relation of our coming into this space and time to interpret space and time in relation to, in this case, just against this other entity that is the relation of positioning of Saturn.
Mm-hmm.
And then we go, oh, okay. And then, when it comes back into its same position, then there's an interpretation.
Like a cycle has been completed.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
But all of that is perception of space and time in relation to three-dimensional Earth. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
But no, obviously, I'm still very much at effects of three-dimensional Earth, and you're too, and most of the people that I know are. But what happens? So in that explosion, and then thus implosion because of the explosion, and you basically reverse your polarity. I think the polarity gets reversed, and then thus, when the polarity gets reversed, you start to interpreting multidimensional structure. The sets of rules that we have designed to apply in three-dimensional space would no longer apply. Is it relevant? I don't know if it's relevant, but if nothing else, maybe somehow through the correlation of the Saturn, that is what it takes for you to even be able to start flipping the polarity.
Right. No, I mean that it lined up with my shift for sure.
Yeah. But there are plenty of people that we hear who go through these, this journey back in their teens.
Yeah.
Right? Like, so maybe common, but definitely not.
Yeah.
I'm not even talking about younger people. Younger people I don't think will be applying to that cycle at all. Like with Aiden and Annabelle, this is not going to be their.
I mean, there's a concept of a quarter life crisis or a third life crisis as well. I don't know what, maybe that's Jupiter instead of Saturn. I don't know the timing of that, but
yeah, I don't
know. They probably also line up to, events in your life, the whole, going from high school to college is kind of this epoch in your life when it's like, okay, now I'm like kind of an adult. And then there's a whole, maybe I've graduated from college, 4 years later, let's say. And now I'm really an adult and like, oh no, things matter all of a sudden and I've got to get a job and I've got to, there are these epochs. They're in, maybe now I'm going to get married, or now I'm going to buy a house, or now I'm going to have kids, or whatever. And there's these things which, like, mile markers in a lifetime that really have the ability to change your perspective, especially about what's important. You have kids, and it's like, oh, a lot of stuff that I thought was important before has just completely fallen away, and now this is what's important. Oh, you buy a house, and it's like, oh, now this is right. Maybe in the opposite order. The house doesn't end up taking precedence over the kids, I hope. So the things that happen to you in your life circumstances, as they change, as they progress, as you do this and move past that and whatever, can, I think, have a very profound impact on what you think is important. And when the things that you used to think were important have fallen away, it really can, I'm saying this from personal experience, present as this like weird identity crisis. It's like, because I really identified with my work. I was my job. I was the vice president of whatever. It doesn't, that was me. And now it's not me. I don't know who I am.
Yeah, but I mean, you go back to the frame reference. What does that mean?
You've changed frames. Because you were living in, my vice presidency is me, and you kept pushing that forward, and you pushed it out through eternity, because I will always be vice president, or maybe I'll be president, but I'm always, I define myself by that forward into the future. And then at some point, if that falls off, you still have this memory, this idea that, oh, I was going to be this in the future, and then that fell off.
No. The frame is being designed, and this is going off subject completely, but the frame is being designed in your childhood trauma when that identity is soothing a pain body.
Okay.
Right? So the vice presidency at this point, right? Like I met somebody yesterday who was shoving out the vice presidency, right? The vice president at that point is an identity for the lack of self-esteem.
Right.
That I have not amounted to something, right?
Yeah.
So the frame is propagating out of there, right? So if you get fired as a vice president, it's not hitting the vice president frame. It's that I'm not going to amount to anything and I'm a loser. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
So it's important to recognize that.
Right. I see. Yeah,
right.
I see what
So
you mean.
like we need to clarify, like, you don't want to surface dwell. Surface dwelling does absolutely nothing, because the second you grab onto, oh, you know what? I'm sure I'm great because I can buy people flowers, or sure I'm great because I can buy people X. And then all of a sudden you can't buy people X or Y. Then all of a sudden your identity crumbles. Do you see what I mean? So you will always find another vice president in a reiteration, or, whatever. Yeah.
Right. I mean, yes, you're right. That is the place to look at it from. But still, where I was going was that can precipitate this identity crisis of, I no longer know who I am. Yes, because I was this person, and that was soothing my pain body, because now it enabled me to do this or feel this or whatever. Feel this, really.
Yeah.
And now it doesn't. It doesn't work anymore.
I mean,
and that broke, and now I don't know who I am.
Yeah, but the reason why everything will break is because the universe is speeding up in a sense that you can no longer carry the density. Because going back to the topic is, if the goal is to collapse the duality and basically explode, and then in order to switch the polarity and go into multidimensional interpretation, you can't carry that density. Mm-hmm. So your world will always be imploding, and the imploding will speed up until you release the density that you're carrying there frame by frame. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I think that's super important.
Yeah, no, that's a really good way to word it.
So, and I think that is what's happening, right? The frames are speeding up, and they're becoming more and more obvious to me, at least. But I think they are to you. You're just maybe have not been interpreting them by frame. Like, I have not been interpreting by frame, but that's the word that I was giving them. Like, they're frames, just choice by choice, like just really quick frames. But that is because that is the interpretation of three-dimensional reality. And so what we're moving in right now is that we have to basically recognize that is how we're functioning in order to, at least in my sense, in order to feel comfortable understanding of what's happening to me. But I wonder if this will happen to some people and they will be okay and not needing to understand it.
I mean, there's a lot of people, so probably.
Yeah. Right.
I mean, you can. There's any number of ways you can deal with that. Whether that's the stereotypical midlife crisis. I'm going to go buy a Porsche, and then now I feel slightly better because I have this car that everybody is impressed by, or whatever.
But this comes down to. So what I'm saying is superficial addressing of your midlife crises will no longer suffice.
I mean, for most people, for some people,
no.
But
what I'm saying is going forward, people would not be able to dwell on superficial level.
I mean, I hope so. I mean, I know that sucks personally from experience. I know that sucks. But I know that is in the end, that is the vastly better place to be. Maybe don't buy Porsche stock. If a lot of the reason people will end up buying, ridiculous cars is for the superficial thing, and that ends up falling away.
Well, I mean, if you're gonna fuck up your life, Porsche is a heck of a lot better than going to, service a Johnson account.
Yeah.
So
heroin, yeah.
Or heroin.
Yeah.
Or I don't know, whatever.
I know.
That's a side note. Okay, so going back, I think what's happening is the structure of space and time is being dissolved. And because our human bodies rely on the structure of space and time, and we propagate it, in fact, and then feed it, and then thus interpret it as reality through the density that we carry from our pain body, the only way for us to move into interpretation past the space and time, or past what we interpret as three-dimensional reality, would be to release the density that propagates it. And to release the density that propagates it basically would be to release the density. We have spent 85 podcasts or 84 podcasts before this talking about doing that. So, and as you do that, and as you dissolve the more and more of your density, sooner or later you will enter into some sort of point of unified collapse where your three-dimensional self/being will no longer function in three-dimensional space or interpret three-dimensional space. And then your reality will be multidimensional from a whole other standpoint that I have yet to be able to interpret other than just touching on that structure. And I do think humans were already there.
I think so too.
So this is not something that we're doing for the first time.
I think, just looking at any of the ancient stories, especially from the indigenous peoples all over the world, what they describe is that.
What? They don't describe the process of going.
No, they don't. They talk about it as if that's just normal. And maybe it's humans, maybe it's not humans. Maybe it's, Viracocha levitating and melting stones and stuff. But it's...
Yeah, that's what comes on the other side.
Yeah.
Post-explosion into implosion into the polarity reverse or whatever that is. And when I say polarity, that actually mean more than that. It's almost like you quantum leap past the dual particle into something that is bigger. I don't even know what dual particle is. Something with dual particles, and then the dual particles basically implodes itself out, and then what it becomes is a whole other interpretations of its existence that was initially a substructure of this bigger interpretation of matter, but somehow with particles. Damn it. Where is this theoretical physicist when I don't know. It is frustrating to me to have this information come in and only being able to talk at these brushstroke interpretations, right? Like, oh, I think that's what it is, but then not have anybody interpret the what I actually mean. Do you know what I mean? Because obviously somebody can listen to it and go, guess what? The dual particle is actually this because it makes sense because we know what holds whatever is these two particles. Anyway, so yes. So I think that is what's happening. And I think the download that I got, this is basically a portion of it. And then discomfort that I'm feeling is just basically going through this visceral experience towards something that feels very imminent, but the very imminent is a space that I'm completely blind to and unaware of. And approaching that space is kind of disorienting because it's quite literally like, it's like, it almost feels like you're walking from a 3-dimensional space, or even let's say 4-dimensional space, if you believe we're already in a 4-dimensional space, into something completely unperceived, which is 5th or 6th. Do you see what I mean? And then you're like, what the fuck does that even mean? But that is how it feels. And disorientation that I feel is approaching that space and then feeling uncomfortable in the form that I am, because the form that I am does not fit into the form that I'm going into. Does that make sense?
I think so, yeah.
I think that's where we're going, which is super exciting to me. But I would say extremely disorienting. But it's to me, like, just understanding that is how I feel, like, creates some sort of like
understanding how you feel is like the most. That if we have a job here on Earth, that's our job. That's like the most fundamental thing that we can do is to understand how we feel.
Yeah, but in this case, it's understanding how I feel out of the discomfort of feeling discomfort.
Sure.
Right? Do you know what I mean? So
yeah.
there's still pain body there that is being dragged, that my 3-dimensional form feels threatened by
that's
discomfort.
That's what I mean by understanding how you feel. Like,
yeah.
Like really understanding how you feel, where it's coming from, all that stuff.
Yeah. Right. Because it's interesting, right? I can connect to self way, way on the other side, which is basically this everlasting, uninterrupted consciousness. Do you see what I mean? Like, right? I don't know if you feel your existence as this one being
sometimes
of existence, like the one being of oneness that then propagates existence.
Yeah, sometimes.
So I feel that, and then I feel this very dense interpretation of myself that I perceive to be real, right? But then it's interesting to now recognize is there's millions of variations, if not billions of variations in between. Right. And so what we perceive as beings that function in let's say 5th-dimensional, 6th-dimensional, 7th-dimensional consciousness are just reiterations of the same propagation of the ray that interpret themselves in their finite form. Right. In their fractalized form, and not as fractalized as our 3-dimensional space, but still in the fractalized form that is still not the oneness that they themselves also feel.
Right. There's a spectrum or continuum of it, all the way from completely dissociated to completely unified, and
Yeah, right. But for me to approach something that dissolves the 3-dimensional interpretation of reality, and I say 3-dimensional, but I'm just a number throwing as a concept to give parameters, and then go into a 4th-dimensional space, to the 3-dimensional space feels threatening and self-destructing, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, to perceive a 4th-dimensional being or 4th-dimensional existence from 3-dimensional space is almost impossible, right? Like, quite literally, in the Bible, we define them as gods who use the power of the sun to bend time and space and melt molten rock and, all that. Like, we could literally idolized that type of being, but that type of being is still a refractory nature that is just scale somewhere. It's not up, it's not higher, but it is somewhere that is other than our interpretation of reality.
Right. And like humans themselves in the last few thousand years haven't really changed much, in as much as you could take a newborn human from 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 years ago, plop them in right now, and they would be raised, and they would be indistinguishable from any other human. But we have this technology now that we didn't 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 years ago, that makes it seem like we're so much more advanced. How was I going with that? As opposed to, probably further back in time, humans innately, and whether this is through training, whether this is through learning, whether this is through some sort of direct experience, I don't know, probably we're more advanced than we are right now.
Yeah.
And of course, maybe Viracocha, for example, maybe Viracocha is some sort of different being that is not human. Maybe Viracocha is human and was just some sort of, adept at something.
Yeah.
I don't know. But all the ancient stories talk about gods, and whether that's a literal god, whether that's extraterrestrial, whether that's some sort of actual human from a different culture who came over, don't know. Some talk about humans that had these powers. Yeah, but that seems to have been lost.
Yeah.
So that progression into that feels kind of stunted for the last several thousand years. Oh yeah, we've got GPS and striped toothpaste and hydrogen bombs. Yay. As a shout out to John Anthony West. But we're not actually different than we were than Socrates, right? Yay, we have all the knowledge we've accumulated, minus what we've lost. We've got libraries full of stuff, and we've got, magic rectangles that can look up any fact ever. That's neat. But at a biological level, at a spiritual level, we're really not far off of that at all.
No, but I think that what we have been trying to do, and this is what happened, is that all of us, to some extent, at all times, are connected to this greater knowledge, right? And, all the scientists, those who, don't want to admit to it are just assholes, are receiving their advanced theoretical science information from the quantum field, right? From this vast amount of information that is just out there as something they can know that is true. And they basically, what they're doing is arrivals started reverse engineering themselves into that truth, right? But when we lost our connection to, let's say, greater knowledge, greater power, multidimensionality, connection to the source, and then thus propagation of the source from us, we still had remote memory or remote key within us,
right,
that had that knowing as the truth. And so through this scramble of holy fucking shit, how do we survive now? The only way we were able to basically start reversing ourselves as, back to science as God, back to God, or back to oneness, or back to wholeness, is through science. And so the only thing that science has ever been able to accomplish is something that we had in our memory already, that we went, okay, I know this is possible. I know this is doable. I remember this. Somehow it's in the cumulative consciousness. Somehow I'm accessing this, field where it exists. Let me go ahead and reverse engineer my way into it. Mm. And that's it. So question one is, if we did not have that knowledge, and then we weren't basically stubborn enough to survive, would we still exist as a human population today, if we did not try to reverse engineer our way into wholeness. That's what science is trying to do. We're trying to reverse engineer our way into wholeness, right? Like this is religion and science merging itself together, quite literally. The proper religion, not the, when I say religion, I'm talking about oneness. Contemplative question there is, would the human race have survived and then thus been at the population size that it is right now, having this vast number of experience and data that it's producing, if we did not somehow, at least even in scientific terms, try to somehow stay connected to the oneness?
Yeah.
To this memory thereof, and then thus go, how do we reach this point? How we access something that I know that is within me, right? I know that is the truth. So to some extent you go, okay, is that negative progress? Because we have because we thought, oh wait, everything that I'm feeling and experiencing and remembering has to be reached through the physical interpretation of my reality, three-dimensional physicality, as opposed to me recognizing, wait, I can go into this extra space that is actually part of this, let's say called ether, right? Or fifth element or whatever you want to go. And I can actually interact with it and then change time and space continuum because I'm looping myself out of that action. And then thus I'm creating, what Tesla touched on and what Viracocha touched on as the reality that is bigger than the three-dimensional limited interpretation of my truth. Do you see what I mean?
Mm.
So the question is it disservice or based on how we were locked was basically our only way to God or our only way to self-wholeness?
Yeah, I don't know.
There's a whole argument there. Like, right, the goal of the existence of oneness is to propagate experience and to propagate nuance. And so having large populations of people or interpreting large populations of people generates more data and generates more nuance, right? Of course, it generates more density. And so the goal is, if you want that population density to be risen, quite literally risen, Jesus style, to the next reiteration of interpretation, you need the power source to do so, right? And so the population had to increase in order for us to have the cumulative power source to be able to ascend. But would that have occurred if we, at the time, did not use science and technology in order to try to stay somehow coherently striving or to connected to that oneness? Like, right, would we have reincarnated and even had an experience if even from scientific term, we were not one with God?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know.
Because a scientist, even as an atheist scientist right now, like if you think the most atheist, most militant atheist person, right? What are they grabbing onto? They're grabbing onto aspects of pure science, right? Usually an atheist is a complete, science-driven person, right? But what is that science? That science is collapsing probability, right? Collapsing self into reverse engineering into oneness, into God.
Yeah.
And then only when you become mature enough past 40, right? Going back to the Saturn return, will you realize, shit, what I've been doing for the last 40, 50, 60 years is just making my way back to God as an atheist.
Yeah.
It takes a large person to admit to that.
We just watched last night a episode of Open Minds on Gaia, and it had Paul Wallace and Sean O something. He's that guy's a Irish Catholic priest.
But both Paul Wallace and both of them were priests.
Yeah,
I'm not sure if Paul was Catholic or not, but some kind of Christian based.
Right. But we could have a whole episode on them. But where I was going was, they talked about how the push toward monotheism, and it's really easy and obvious to look at like how the Christian church, the Catholic Church, really inserted itself between people and we'll say God or oneness or source. And before that, whether that's in indigenous tribes, whether that's in polytheistic cultures where people had a connection to God, like, oh, well, there's the fire is a God, and water is a God, and earth is a God, and sky, maybe these are all gods, but everybody had a way to relate to God individually. And then here comes the church, and it's you have to go through the priest, through the bishop, through the cardinal, through the pope to God. That's the only way to talk to God. And there's these bureaucratic layers injected in, and there's these rules, and God isn't always friendly. Maybe he's jealous or angry or whatever, depending on which book of the Bible you're in the middle of reading. And that really, I think, did a huge disservice to humanity in that it really pushed us down. And maybe when I was saying, we're no different now than we were 2,500 years ago, maybe we're worse off now because of this history. And it isn't just the traditional Christian church that's doing this. It's a lot. But as far as spiritual growth, not religious growth, but spiritual growth, I think that.
Yeah, I mean, yes, I think. Are you trying to find a party to blame?
No, I wasn't trying to find a party. I was trying to come up with some sort of explanation for why we not only have we not progressed over the last few thousand years, but I think we've regressed.
We went further and further away from the elemental nature of our existence.
Yes,
into the physicality.
Right, and we've disconnected from any connection we had to oneness, source, God, whatever word you like to use for that.
Yeah.
And, it's been pushed, it's just been crammed into us that we don't have a connection. The only connection we have is through some sort of intermediary.
Yeah, but the truth is the reason why you would connect to the church or go to the church is because within you actually feel this etherical truth that there is such thing as you as a larger being than what you can interpret right now. You might not know what you are, but you can feel this elated feeling of oneness when you connect to the field of oneness.
Right. And
the churches utilize that for control.
And that's where it began. I mean, I believe it began with these best intentions. But, look at any sizable organization, whether it's a company, whether it's a government, whether it's a religious organization, and inevitably it all just kind of goes to shit, and, power and corruption and control ends up taking over. And so, 100, 200, 300, 400 AD, there's the Gnostics and the Essenes and whatever. And I believe that they had a message that is much, much, much closer to the objective truth of the situation than what pretty much any of the religious organizations have today.
Yeah,
across the board.
Yeah, but yes. For me, it's hard not to universally. If you think about it, the best way for you to interpret density would perceive separation.
Yeah.
Right. So nothing exists without the permission of the oneness. How deep you sinked into that separation is kind of like an individual choice.
Yeah.
And
they there's still a lot of good in even these churches' messages, right?
But wait, it's just because they ride on.
Yes.
They need partial truth in order to convert the masses into suppression.
Right. And it's, I'm not saying it's all some sort of mustache twisting evil plot directly.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah,
but
maybe.
I think it's just they've lost the way, and now it's just full steam ahead with this new direction that I'm not even sure it's a insidiousness. It's
Well, it's insidious.
Generations and generations of moving off by a degree, moving off by a degree, moving off by a degree, and now you're just 90 degrees off of where you're supposed to be.
Yeah, it's insidious in the way that the corruption came from the grab for power.
Sure.
Right? It's a human nature for survival propagating itself into the church, right?
Right. I mean,
but that's true of any being you meet on the street, right? Unless they are a true connection to oneness, any word that will come out of my mouth, right? Like if you meet me, the word that are coming out of my mouth, so that when you 1 minute, you could probably not trust me 99% of the time, as long as I'm operating out of that density of unawareness, out of my pain body and truth. I mean, and unless I'm actively talking about it, I'm operating out of my pain body and truth. You can't trust anyone.
Right. I mean,
it's a lie. Self lie. Like, right. Like I'm not actively walking around lying, but I'm lying to self. Thus I'm lying to you. Which is what churches do.
The idea that the Inquisition and the Crusades and the conquistadors coming over and all this is under the guise of Jesus.
Boy.
And that's insanity. I mean, how many millions of people, possibly billions of people, have been murdered or tortured or whatever under in the name of Jesus? It's just that's wild.
Yeah,
that's wild.
I can't. But I think everything stems from not de-densifying and holding on to density and propagating the density from frame to frame from frame. And how fucked up that looks, right? Mm-hmm. Truthfully, how fucked up it looks is completely a sovereign choice that each one of us makes from frame to frame to frame.
Well, it's. I mean, you pushing your frame forward blindly. It can just propagate forward, or it can, be like some sort of snowball going down the hill and just get bigger and bigger and bigger.
Well, it will be a snowball because the goal of self is to find self. And if this frame does not have enough pain and suffering in it for you to recognize that this frame is a choice, then the next frame will have more pain and suffering in it.
Eventually, it's an avalanche of shit.
Well, yeah, each frame will get tougher and tougher and tougher as a personal choice in order for you to see through your own frames. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Like, I think it's extremely empowering. I never finished the William Henry thought. He said that he went to some sort of psilocybin experience or something like that. And he's older. He's, in the, I don't know however, older than us. And he said that within the psilocybin experience, he went into the altered state. I don't know if it was psilocybin or something else. I don't know. It was some kind of psychedelic substance that basically made him see something like almost subconsciously, then made him not carry the frame of his knee brace forward. Mm-hmm. And there was no intervention necessary other than like one day he's like, I don't know why I'm wearing that brace. I don't need the right. So the psilocybin in that point, the psychedelic basically went frame reset, and that's it. So why people have such a profound, when we did ayahuasca, and why so many people do ayahuasca in order to stop an addiction, right, is because it inserts itself and resets some frame. It's
like a reboot for your brain.
Yeah, it's a reboot. But what that reboot is, I want to bring it back to this podcast, is it takes away the propagation of that frame. Mm-hmm. It almost goes like, oh, guess what? Let me help you out. Frame yanked.
Yeah.
And however you go psychedelically or whatever mind journey you go on to see that frame and to connect that frame to why you keep on propagating it is really wild. Like it's a very personal, very visual experience. Do you know what I mean? But at the same time, that visual experience, the psychedelic, has you be taking out of that subconscious propagation of the frame, and your subconscious goes into some sort of weird journey with colors and lights and whatever, right? Cats, and then allows you to yank that frame out, right? And next thing you know, you're like, oh my gosh, I don't even know what the heck happened. That's just not even a thing.
Yeah,
but it's because it short circuits the system that keeps the frames propagating forward. Right. You're almost like taking what a psychedelics do, a psilocybin or whatever DMTs or LSDs. What they do is they take this line that you think is a continuational portion that is only existing in your mind as a continual portion out of your trauma, right? And then basically it quite literally inserts truth like into like the your next frame that you would have had would have been a propagation of the exact same copy forward, where you're like, oh, here's where my knee's hurting. And the next frame is going, here's where my knee's hurting. And the psychedelic substances or psilocybin or LSD, whatever, basically goes, oh, guess what? I'm just going to insert a visual into awareness of that frame. And then you go into some sort of shock. Usually it's a shock, right? Like it feels completely uncomfortable in the process. You're like, oh my gosh, I really hate myself or whatever, right? Like usually I hate myself is the first thing that comes out of me. Or oh my gosh, looks I died. Or look, I'm a bird and I flew off. Or whatever however you personally interpret that release is a frame interruption. It basically kind of like zaps it out.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you come out of the experience, like you wake up the next morning and your knee's fine. And you're like, I have no idea what the fuck happened, but it was well worth it.
Yeah.
And you almost think the pain and suffering that you went through is worth it. But the pain and suffering is you got to face, 40 years worth of propagation of that frame buildup.
Yeah. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Like if you think of frames literally as movie frames, it's like it stops the movie projector, throws the old film away, and now you have maybe there's no more film. Maybe there's a blank film. I don't know how you want the analogy to go, but yeah.
But that frames, we have thousands, if not millions, if not billions of them propagating for each kind of belief, each kind of situation.
I've got my knee frame. I've got my, shoulder frame. I've got all these things that,
Yes. Yeah.
Not even physical. I've got my, we don't have enough money frame. I've got my whatever.
Yes.
The car is going to break frame. And
Yeah. So when I'm talking about, to begin with, referencing back that idea of the buckshot, right? Like that doesn't even do justice. Like buckshot, you can say, okay, that's a lot, but let's probably be honest, it's 30 or 40, right? I'm assuming. I don't know. I kind of feel bad even referencing something that kills living things. But right, it's that buckshot approach where each frame has like 30 or 40 different clusterfucks of shit in it that you are propagating millisecond to millisecond forward, right? And when you go into the oneness of the consciousness, the frame is like, oh my gosh, it's just tranquility and peace and harmony and oneness and elated love, and you're just drowning in like, I don't know what, the universe of happiness. And, that is just an understatement to say that it's universe of happiness and joy and love. You're like, oh my gosh, I'm just like drowning in beauty. Like to me, when I drown in flowers, that's what it is. Like when I say I'm drowning in flowers, it feels that way. But, flowers are a very three-dimensional interpretation of something that I'm propagating in connection past the three-dimensional space into the oneness with the eternal being, universe, me, or higher self, whatever you want to call it, or God, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Right. So we're yeah. So anyway, I think that is very useful. I will be curious to know as it uncovers what that explosion / reversal looks like.
Yeah.
Because I think like on the cosmic scale, when we interpret creations of like explosion of stars and deteriorations of stars, what we're actually trying to do is we're trying to interpret moving of structure into phases. Right. It's a phase change. What we're going to going into is a phase change.
Yeah.
And when we, from the scientific standpoint, when we interpret, the star is going to explode, and looks like we're looking at the, telescope, and looks like that star is going to explode or has exploded back in time and space, and now, one supernova, and now, I don't know, whatever it is, that is just us interpreting phase changes in three-dimensional reality. But it's because we're interpreting it only in three-dimensional reality. And in fact, the actual experience beyond a three-dimensional limited set of beings is completely different. That's just what we see and perceive. Just like Mercury, time, we perceive and see it differently, or for us. But, the reality of Mercury is different than the reality of us, right? Which is funny because to some extent you can draw a conclusion that from three-dimensional space, it would have to explode or implode in order to go into a phase change, which would sound very apocalyptic. But, apocalyptic is, or revelation like, but, apocalyptic, I think actually as a term is just like, what does it actually mean? It's
knowing or
it's like expansion or something. We have come to fear the word, right? Its purpose has been bred into us to fear the word of
there's
apocalypse.
A lot of words that we take that culturally mean something scary. But really they don't. Oh, here, I'm going to look it up.
Yeah, no, I think on purpose the church has bred into us to fear the word apocalypse, right? Or like the second coming of Jesus, right? Is like this thing that people fear because for all intents and purposes, this church has communicated it as basically like dying, right? Death or...
In Greek, apocalypse means revelation, unveiling, or disclosure.
There you go.
It refers to something previously hidden being made visible, like a truth or a secret. But nowadays, it means the end of the world or something, destructive, like
revealing of the hidden, I think is quite literally what it is. But Revelations on purpose is named Revelations because it is quite literally coming into a different phase. That's what it is, right? From the scientific standpoint and the church standpoint, that is how it all relates together.
Revelations is crazy. It's just like, there's all these books of the Bible that are, they're different, but they're mostly coherent, the New Testament. But then Revelation is just like...
I don't know what Revelation has on it. Yeah. No, but I would wager to say that what Revelation has is interpretation of reality from just like us interpreting Mercury can only be interpreted from us interpreting Mercury. Revelations or apocalypse is only interpreted from a three-dimensional standpoint of view, opening to the infinite kind of, right? And like you don't even know what that feels like. Do you know what I mean? And it feels like death and it feels like scary, but in truth is your three-dimensional form basically kind of sort of is dying. It dies, right? Or it evolves, but evolving feels like death, right? Like when the caterpillar like dies, it kind of dies. Right.
When it turns into a butterfly?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. It is death of one form and resurrection into a new form.
Yeah.
And, Jesus dying and resurrecting into a different form is the same thing. Right. But maybe caterpillar has awareness of that and maybe Jesus has awareness of that. But we have been bred to believe in a very dualistic world of existence and not to us is
that's bad.
Null,
that's scary.
Is non-existence, right? But we've had many podcast episodes to recognize that there is existence in this form, and then there is existence in that form. But the existence is continual regardless of the form. I'm rewarding that now. I have said that differently before, but I'm rewarding it now based on this structure.
No, but the vast majority of people, especially people who, anyone atheistic, anyone who doesn't believe in reincarnation, and maybe not people who believe in heaven and hell. Maybe they think so, but a lot of people think, oh, you die, that's the end of it. That's the end of you. That's the end of your consciousness. That's the end of everything.
Yeah.
It's just like your lights out.
Right. Yeah. But the second you have any kind of, if you step back and you just allow yourself to go, okay, am I an idiot or have I personally myself had some sort of experiences where you're like, I don't know if that seems right. Right. Yeah. I think people who believe that honestly, they're not going to like that if they're listening to this, but chances are they're not, are actually afraid of the unknown because that space carries more unknowns than we can possibly imagine.
Not only unknowns, but maybe unknowables.
Yeah, right. And so for those who ultimately at the core trauma trying to mitigate unsafety a lot of times goes into knowing, right? Like knowing physics, knowing chemistry, knowing quantum mechanics, knowing relativity, in order to overcompensate for the trauma of the unknown that you experienced as a child, right? It's a version of control, tuned into knowing, right? Like, you know who I'm referencing right now, who basically is epitome of that, wrote all kinds of books and blah, blah, blah. But basically at the core, I still have a trigger about that, obviously, as I bring this up. But at the core, it's just a broken child who's afraid and unsafe. And then thus mitigation of the unknown or study of physics is the only way into safety. Right. Yeah.
Malay.
Right. No, it's a lot. It's a lot. Yeah. Whenever my zip file starts to have some space available, and it starts to open a little bit at a time. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening.